rethinking this policy.
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And a very good evening. Welcome to Farage on GB News. It's 7 o'clock. And good news, folks, he's landed. And I've persuaded Nigel not to go home, but to come straight to the studio to give his latest thoughts on, in particular, the Rwanda vote and much, much more, the lawful immigration numbers besides. Also, we're going to be talking about international student numbers. I've got a big expose on that and the latest news on COP28. All of that, lots to discuss, but first of all, it's the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Richard, thank you and good evening. Well, the top story tonight, police are still appealing for help in finding a missing mother of three who's gone missing in Norfolk. Footage has been released of Gaynor Lord, who was last seen on CCTV in Norwich Town Centre on Friday. Police are hoping this video, if you're watching on television, of the 55-year-old running home may jog the memory of passers-by. Her coat has been discovered in the River Wensum, which runs through the park, and police are saying it's likely she may have entered the water. Underwater teams have been searching the area today.
We are continuing the work that we have been doing since Friday night here at Wensum Park, conducting searches both on land and in the water. Today we've been joined by a specialist dive team who are in the water now, and they're supporting the search in terms of getting into those deeper parts of the River Wensum, which then obviously supports all of the search work that we've already done here at the river.
Politics now, and Tory infighting was a big focus of today's Christmas-themed Prime Minister's Questions, the final session of the year. 38 Rebel Conservative MPs chose to abstain last night from a vote on the Safety of Rwanda bill, but it still passed with a majority of 44. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, took aim, accusing the government of being in meltdown, but Rishi Sunak hit back, saying the numbers on migration and the economy speak for themselves.
Boats down by a third, and crucially, as we heard from Honourable Friend, tax cuts coming to help working families in the new year.
Mr. Speaker, he can spin it all he likes, but the whole country can see that yet again the Tory party is in meltdown and everyone else is paying the price. Now, he kicked the can down the road. But in the last week, his MPs have said of him, he's not capable enough, he's inexperienced, he's arrogant, a really bad politician.
Sir Keir Starmer, now a man who strangled a pensioner to death and then went on a spending spree with her savings, has been jailed for at least 31 years. 71-year-old Susan Hawkey was tortured in her northwest London home in September last year by Zaire Howard, who forced her to give up her bank card and PIN number. Hours later, the 24-year-old and his girlfriend, Chelsea Grant, spent £13,000 of her money on luxury goods. Grant was also jailed for 15 years. Greater Manchester has decided to scrap a controversial scheme for a clean air zone. The Mayor, Andy Burnham, is promising drivers won't have to pay to use roads. He's unveiled alternative plans to control air pollution in the city. Instead, leaders say investment in buses and taxis will bring clean air to the region much faster than charging drivers. Just over £50 million is earmarked for electric buses and £30 million in grants for cleaner taxis. City leaders have pledged to achieve air pollution targets by 2025. That's a year earlier than planned. That's the news on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
And a very good evening. Welcome to Farage here on GB News. Well, the day after the night before, excuse me, and you might wonder, what was all the fuss about? There was all that great noise, the 5 families coming out and pontificating, and yet the vote passed. 44, you might say that's quite comfortable. I think many would feel that it was, and I suspect that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, slept a lot more soundly than had been feared last night. So now we're sort of saying, well, what's the impact of all of that? How long is it going to take to get this legislation through? Will the government get it through? They say they will. Many others question that. And actually, will it make any difference whatsoever? What will be the extent of the claims that are put forward? Will those claims go all the way through the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court and, of course, to the ECHR, which, of course, stopped that in the process? Well, we'll be debating all of that. And my question to you on this, of course, is, I mean, the Prime Minister says very convincingly, this is the big deterrent. This will stop the boats. He's absolutely nailed his colours to that mast. So my question to you, viewers and listeners, do you believe the Prime Minister? Is this a deterrent? Is it going to work? That's the big question. They spent hundreds of millions of pounds on it. Do you think it's a deterrent? Is it going to work? Well, I suspect maybe the Prime Minister had a bit more sleep last night than my first guest on the show. You may recognise him because actually it's his show. Nigel, a very warm welcome back to your show, back to these shores. Fantastic to have you back. It must be a bit of almost like a culture shock.
Well, it is, and to be a guest on my own show is quite novel. I mean, anybody sane, of course, would have got back from Australia and gone to bed, but that's why I'm here. No, I couldn't resist it, and there is just so much to talk about, isn't there? Amazing. I mean, I like Marc Francois as a person, the ERG boss, but like the Grand Old Duke of York, you know, he's marched the troops up to the top of the hill and then he's marched them down again.
Exactly as you predicted. Let's just remind ourselves what Nigel said on Monday on this show when he was in Australia.
Will the backbenchers have the guts to vote it down? Well, normally they march up to the top of the hill and they march back down again. Most of them are a pretty spineless bunch. I hope that I'm proved wrong. What is for certain is that Sunak is on course to lead the Conservative Party to their worst election result in modern times. And frankly, I think they deserve pretty much everything that's coming to them.
So there you are, but I mean, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, they're feeling a bit more confident, a bit more comfortable.
Well, confident they've got the party under control, confident that the rebels, frankly, haven't got the courage of their own convictions. I mean, how can you one day argue that what's being done will make no blooming difference, and then the next day effectively go along with it by just sitting on the benches abstaining and allowing the government to win? The really big question here, as you say, is will this make any difference anyway? And the answer is absolutely not. Number one, it won't stop any of the individual legal claims, and we know that, just how long that whole process takes. And the big picture, this is all fiddling while Rome burns. The big picture, and we saw this when that first flight couldn't leave for Rwanda, when a nameless judge, probably not somebody even trained in law, I know it sounds bonkers, but these are the so-called jurists that sit in Strasbourg on the ECHR court. All the while that court is there, we are not in control of policy, we're not in control of deportations. So frankly, it doesn't matter what Sunak says. 4 successive Tory leaders have promised us they'll deal with illegal immigration, and we're no closer.
Now, the Prime Minister has been saying a lot recently, as has his cabinet members, that actually the numbers are down 30% this year, when in the Mediterranean they're up by well over 50%. So that's his line of argument. But this deterrent point is key. Now, whilst you're away, Mark White was in northern France, and he did a really interesting report for GB News. He spoke to some of the migrants. I think we've got a clip here of actually what one of the migrants was saying to Mark White about the deterrent effect.
Mention Rwanda and the people here in the camps just laugh. It's become a bit of a joke. The threat hasn't put them off because no one here thinks for a second they're heading back to Rwanda if they make it to the UK.
So that's the key point.
Yeah, and
it's a running joke.
once again, Mark White doing fantastic work for us here at GB News. It is no deterrent. Everyone knows it. And whilst the numbers are down, if I'd said to you 5 years ago that, 30,000 young men would cross the English Channel in dinghies and be allowed to stay, I mean, you'd have thought I'd been smoking something. So the fact the numbers are not as bad as last year, frankly, to hang on to that is really cold comfort farm.
And also, we've learned in the last week that the government is placing contracts for managing the arrivals in Dover and at Manston up until 2030. About £700 million worth of contracts. But as you say, all of this, in a sense, is modest, although significant, compared to the other big news when you're away. The lawful immigration numbers increased by 20% in 22 to 745,000.
I mean, nobody did more to try and highlight the cross-channel problem than me, going out repeatedly into the channel, asking why our mainstream channels were not covering this issue. So I've sort of, in some senses, owned this from the beginning, and yet I am going to admit now, it is very small beer compared to legal migration into Britain. And these, Richard, are arguments I've been making publicly for well over a decade, that we simply cannot deal with the numbers. And whether that is having any hope of getting a GP appointment, any prospect of your kids or grandkids ever getting themselves onto the housing ladder, the near impossibility, as Christmas approaches, of driving around our motorways to go and visit family. Our quality of life is diminishing directly as a result of a population crisis caused by a government that, frankly, isn't concerned about the numbers. You know why? Because they're in hock to big businesses.
That's right, and of course to the universities. And later in the show, we're going to actually be talking about what I think is an abuse of the international visa scheme. But before that, down the line, we've got James Johnson, who's the co-founder of the JL Partners, former special advisor to the former Prime Minister Theresa May, ran Number 10's polling strategy. James, a very good evening. Thank you for joining us on Farage here on GB News. So you're polling all the time. I just want to touch first, please, James, on a poll that I think was done by someone else than yourself with regard to the percentage of the population who think actually this is going to have any deterrent effect at all. I think it was YouGov suggested it might only be 1% of the population. Can it really be that low?
Well, certainly at the moment, the public's view is that the flights aren't going to Rwanda, which is the truth. So therefore, like just in your Mark White piece there, people don't believe it's going to happen and they don't believe it's going to have any effect. Now, if that were to change and actually flights started to take off, then I think the public may well change their minds on the scheme. But at the moment, they are looking at this and they're looking at, the government's disarray. And if I were Rishi Sunak, I wouldn't take much heart from the vote result yesterday. It bought him a bit of time, but this should have been an easy, straightforward vote for him. To the voters, this just shows chaos and getting no nearer, in their mind, to a solution.
Do you think with the government's confidence now from last night, that 44 vote victory, do you think in a sense that the Prime Minister might actually convince the electorate a bit more over the next couple of weeks that actually it's on track, he's in control, he's going to get it through the House of Lords, he'll get the support of his MPs, and that maybe in the new year those polling numbers might improve for him in terms of convincing people it's a deterrent?
Well, look, faith in the Conservatives is so low, both going back to the fall of Boris Johnson, Liz Truss's mini-budget, and what they see as a lack of action from Rishi Sunak, that the only way that Rishi Sunak is going to convince them is not through confidence or parliamentary numbers or good messaging. It's going to be through results. So if Rishi Sunak can show that the economy is growing, and we saw results today showing that it wasn't, if Rishi Sunak can prove that NHS waiting lists are falling, if Rishi Sunak can prove that he is stopping the boats, and that doesn't mean a 30% reduction, that means what he was set out to do, which is stopping the boats.
That's my key question, actually, James. That 30% reduction, that they're talking that up really quite strongly. I mean, do you think that's not good enough for voters relative to stopping the boats?
No, it's not. And it goes back to the point Nigel Farage made there, that compared to a few years ago, these are still stratospheric numbers. And crucially, the Prime Minister said he's going to stop them. Now, if he can deliver that promise, if he can stop them or, get them down to negligible numbers, I don't think anyone's expecting necessarily a complete literal never ever again, but, getting them down to negligible numbers or stopping them entirely, then I think voters will say, OK, fair play, he's done it. But that is a huge task now for the Prime Minister, and he's running out of time.
Well, meanwhile, you, James, have been doing some polling on the public's reaction to Nigel himself during the show, during his time in the jungle, getting to the final, and quite interesting results you've discovered there in terms of the popularity rating coming out of the jungle compared to going into the jungle.
Yeah, so we ran two polls. We ran one before Nigel Farage went in, and with Conservative 2019 voters, so those people that voted for Boris Johnson and the Tories in 2019, absolutely key to the next election for both Labour and the Tories. Before he went into the jungle, Nigel Farage had a net rating of +1 with those voters. So 37% said they had a positive view, 36% a negative view. We ran the poll again this weekend after Nigel came out, and that has really transformed. He's now got a net rating of +18. That's a 7-point swing. 46% say they're positive, only 28% negative. Now, that's a big shift in polling terms. And Rishi Sunak with those same voters, and remember, these are voters that voted for the Conservative Party in 2019, Rishi Sunak is on a rating of -3. So although Nigel Farage might not have been crowned king of the jungle, he certainly seems to be at the moment, at least in Conservative 2019 voters' eyes, if you'll pardon the cringe, Richard, king of the political jungle.
King of the political jungle, James Johnson, thank you so much indeed for those thoughts. There you are, Nigel. Finalist, nearly king of the jungle, but maybe the political one. How do you feel about those poll numbers? When you went in, you said you wanted to reach a broader audience.
A lot of people said to me, don't do it, it'll be a disaster, it'll demean you, people will never look at you seriously again. And I said to them all, don't be such stuffed shirts, I think it is worth the gamble and people will see who I really am as opposed to who they think perhaps I am. I'm stunned by the numbers. That is an extraordinary shift in polling terms. And to sit here and think, I'm 21% more popular with Conservative 2019 voters than the Conservative Prime Minister. And I've not even been a member of their party since 1992. It's remarkable. So I'm flattered by it. It shows partly just how much trouble they're in. I think what it also shows is people want political figures, thought leaders to be approachable human beings, with all their flaws, and I've got a couple of those, but as opposed to this sort of political class of almost non-entities.
Yeah, well, it's an extraordinary process being watched by cameras 24/7.
You can't hide.
You can't hide anything. Well, that is absolutely sure.
No, Richard, I'm thrilled. And it absolutely backs up my decision to go and do it. So, no, I'm delighted.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, listeners and viewers, Nigel is back, of course, next week. Farage at Large in Birmingham next Thursday. You can apply through the website. I suspect tickets may be in hot demand. Nigel's going to stay with me through the next segment because there's a really important part of the lawful visa debate, which is the quantity of international student visa numbers. And I've discovered something quite extraordinary. Don't go anywhere, it's GB News.
On State of the Nation tonight at 8 o'clock. A cop-out, the New Deal to end fossil fuels passes without very much scrutiny. But what do we risk by ridding the world of affordable energy? A new poll shows Nigel Farage is more popular than Rishi Sunak among Conservative voters. Would the Tories do better with Nigel? A fifth of UK adults support another lockdown. When will this Project Fair madness end? And is the Sussex halo finally slipping as the Duke and Duchess's charity sees significant drops in donations, or are we just too harsh on the runaway royals? Tune in tonight at 8 o'clock.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
In Rwanda.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Richard Tice, and my special guest on his own show, Nigel Farage, is still with us. We need to talk about international student visas because they are a huge part of the dramatic increase in the lawful immigration numbers. And I've got a graph, hopefully, that will just show that coming up on the screen. Until about 2019, the sort of numbers of international students coming in was about 200,000 every year. That number has now increased in the last 12 months to 500,000 students, and you can see it there. That's just the students over the last about decade. And then on top of that, there was another 150,000 dependents. The government tell us they're going to deal with the dependents, but they're very proud of the student numbers. And many might say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the rules are that having done a degree here or a master's here, you can then stay for 2 years on a graduate working visa, and that qualifies you to then get a 5-year skilled worker visa. You're basically there for life. Now, the Home Office immigration rules are quite clear with regard to international student visas. It says that the university that you are going to is essentially a sponsor, and the rules of sponsorship are this: that the course of study must take place on the premises of the student sponsor, unless it's, for example, a temporary relief if you're going on a field trip or something. And the Home Office requires the sponsors to comply with this, as set out in the sponsor guidance. This is really important, because what we've discovered actually is that is not happening. Now, you can understand it during COVID when everybody was at home or having to be online. But since then, a number of separate studies have shown that actually the vast majority of courses now, a significant percentage, or indeed up to 100%, is either still online or actually you can do it online. So you don't have to go to any seminars, you don't have to go to any lectures whatsoever. And there's an entity called the HEPI Student Academic Experience Survey 2023, which has just been published, shows that 75% of students stated that between 10% and 100% of the lectures were online. 60% said that the same figure, up to 100% of seminars were online. So do you see what's happening here? The very premise of the Home Office student visa obligation is clearly being breached. In fact, you barely need to come at all. You get your visa and you could be somewhere else in the world. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by my first guest to discuss this, Dr. Mike Jones of Migration Watch. Mike, a very good evening. Thanks for this. This is really significant because I believe that knowingly the universities and the Home Office are basically turning a blind eye to this blatant abuse of the rules and regulations.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I mean, the promise of Brexit was to take back control. But essentially what's happened is the Home Office has outsourced control of the student visa system to the universities, which is like putting Count Dracula in charge of the blood transfusion service. I mean, essentially the Department for Education has no interest in enforcing these rules and regulations, and the universities are quite happy to take advantage of this bureaucratic indifference.
It's extraordinary. Now, some will say, and many in the government say, and elsewhere, well, this is fantastic, international education, it's a great export, and we should, the more the merrier, and what's wrong with doing online? What are your thoughts to that, Mike, to those who take that approach?
Well, don't get me wrong, many of the international students deserve to be here. I'm glad they are here. They study at elite universities. They contribute to campus culture and the research community. But there's a point of diminishing returns here. You know, as you pointed out, Richard, the number of student visas is just shy of 500,000. When I graduated in 2005, that number was about 200,000. Many of these students, I'm afraid to say, are propping up substandard institutions that offer Mickey Mouse courses.
And that in itself is really significant. Should we really worry about this, or actually do we just take the view the more money the better? Or actually is the flaw, Mike, if, for example, you didn't automatically qualify for a graduate working visa to stay here after the degree, then actually maybe it would be much less of a problem?
Yeah, that would certainly make a difference. But at the end of the day, you need a cap on student visas. You've got to remember that the higher education sector are a vested interest group. Universities will keep the pedal to the metal on the numbers because it enriches their coffers. But of course, the costs of immigration are dispersed in terms of higher house prices, higher rents, pressure on public infrastructure.
All of the pressure on public services, exactly, which Nigel mentioned earlier. Mike, thank you so much indeed for your thoughts on that. Now, we did approach the government for a comment on this. A government spokesman said during the pandemic, concessions were made to allow visas to be granted to overseas students undertaking remote learning in circumstances. We are updating our policy in this area and will provide further information in due course. Well, I should keep a very close eye on what due course is. We did also ask the student sort of application service called UCAS for a comment on this. They declined. We asked Universities UK for a comment on this. They haven't responded. And the Office for Students also declined to comment. Well, Nigel, your thoughts on this? Am I right on this? Or actually, is the government right saying it's a great export, what's the problem?
Well, first things first, great piece of work. You know, you've exposed that the rules are not being applied, that no one seems to really care. And I find the context interesting because a number of senior Labour and Conservative figures have been arguing now for a couple of years that we should actually take student numbers out of the immigration figures completely, which is very, very interesting. You made the dependence point very quickly. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why any student should be allowed to bring any dependents to come and permanently settle in Britain.
I didn't take my girlfriend up to Manchester when I went.
I mean, well, you might have done, but I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. No, you've uncovered something here, and as you say, once they've graduated, you stay for a couple of years, you get a job, you then get permanent leave to remain. Look, our universities appear to be obsessed by money. Whether it's money coming from foreign students, grants from Chinese companies linked directly to the Chinese government, there's too much of it going on. Yes, in many ways, it is a great export for us. It does bring money into the country, but effectively, it's becoming a backdoor route to mass immigration.
So actually, my suggestion, if the government said, well, we're going to stop the graduate working visa as an automatic right, post-degree or post-masters, then actually you could say online courses is an even better export around the world if our universities are that good. Maybe that's...
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, they could sign up for a British course and do it from wherever they live in the world, couldn't they? So, look, you know, of course, you know, we want people to spend money in our country, but I just think this is being abused wholesale, and the fact you got that sort of weasel answer from the government, you know, they've only said that because you've exposed the fact that actually a coach and horses is being driven through this. But it's at every level, and I think what we have to understand is that those in London that run the Home Office, in our elite universities, in our government and opposition, they are entirely unconcerned by the exploding population in Britain.
Completely unconcerned.
And the impact of that on people's lives is not just being felt, but I think increasingly this is going to be the issue that dominates not just the next general election, but years to come.
And of course, whilst you're away, the government came up with a new 5-point plan on reducing the numbers. They said they were going to reduce them by 300,000. Yeah, that's their stance.
Richard, I'm sorry. The 2010 manifesto will reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year. They said it again in 2015, again in 2017. They paid lip service to it in 2019. And you actually realise they never, ever meant any of it. They've been getting away with telling the British public what they think the public wants to hear without ever intending to deliver it. I mean, it's not very far away from lying to people.
It'll be very interesting what the latest polling numbers say on that. Nigel, great to see you in the studio. Thank you for allowing me to
I'm delighted.
Enjoy the chair.
I'm delighted, and I'll be back where you are on Monday evening at 7 o'clock.
It's been really good fun, and you've done so well. Absolutely fantastic. So, coming up, folks, after the break, yes, they've reached a deal at COP28, 70,000 of them down in Dubai, enjoying themselves. We'll be talking about that. What have they actually said, and will it make a blind bit of difference? Don't go anywhere, it's GB News.
Earlier with Eamon and Isabel. Our top story this morning, the Prime Minister has survived a possible rebellion over his Rwanda bill last night. The legislation comfortably passed with a majority of 44, but there will be further votes in the new year.
Well, let's speak to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who joins us this morning.
The PM won the battle last night with his plan for Rwanda, but will he win the war?
Government has become absolutely fixated on Rwanda as, if you like, the silver bullet that's going to stop the boats. It's not.
This scheme is unethical, unworkable and unaffordable.
What we saw over the weekend was indicative of the weak leadership that we have from Rishi Sunak and the total chaos that there is in this government.
Every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, my friends, to Farage here on GB News. Well, whilst we've been talking about Rwanda and illegal boat crossings, there's been, I thought it was 70,000 delegates down in Dubai talking about climate change. I was wrong. It's nearly 100,000, some 90,000 plus. Heaven knows what they've all been talking about. This is the 28th COP summit. It seems to get bigger and bigger. I guess at some point you might think, well, when are they actually going to sort of, if you're worried about this, when are they going to sort it? I've got a graph here that's quite interesting because what it seems to show, this graph shows that, and from the very first COP some 20 plus years ago, this is the line there, the orange line going up. That's the total CO2 emissions in the world going up and up and up as there are more and more COPs. So it seems to me there's a bit of a contradiction in terms here. Maybe if they stopped, if this was the last COP, then maybe the line might start to go down. Do you see what I'm saying? Anyway, 90,000 people. I reckon it's about a £500 million summit. Well, my next guest actually, I think, was not there. Tom Burke, chairman of the climate think tank E3G. Very good evening to you. Good to see you. So,
evening, Richard.
They've reached a conclusion. They extend. It always seems to go on an extra day whilst there's all sorts of stress and people start crying with joy or fear. And they've reached a conclusion that we're going to transition away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly and equitable manner so as to achieve net zero by 2050 in keeping with the science. Are you satisfied? Are you a happy man? Or are you just regretful you weren't there, Tom?
Actually, I was at the first COP in Berlin in
28 years ago.
A long time ago.
So it's your fault that it hasn't made any progress.
It's entirely my fault. And I saw in your nice graph there that we got a bit of help anyway from COVID. Because you saw that dip, which was a bit from COVID.
Don't talk to me about climate lockdowns, folks. Otherwise, anyway. But look, is this just another sort of cop-out? To coin a phrase.
Good heavens.
Not bad.
But you won't be the first to have made that one, I tell you. No, it's not. And it's quite important in one respect in particular, which is at least we're now all pointing in the same direction. We're not exactly moving down the road, as your graph showed. We're not exactly moving down the road as fast as we need to be. But we used not to be even pointing in the same direction. And we can only solve this problem by stopping burning fossil fuels. Really simple proposition, actually.
Well, look, you say that, but actually fossil fuels has been... it's led to cheaper energy. leading to billions of people living longer, happier lives, greater agricultural productivity. The world is, I think, some sort of 6 or 7 or 8% greener than it was 40 years ago. We might even have a graph that shows that. So, I mean, some might say, actually, cheap energy, more productivity, that's been a good thing.
Well, up until we discovered what the other side of that equation, that balance sheet was, it was a good thing. There's no doubt that we wouldn't be as well off as we are now if we hadn't burnt fossil fuels. That's absolutely true. If we go on burning fossil fuels, we'll end up back in the caves.
Well, you say that, but actually, if we stop, I mean, some people will literally want to stop using fossil fuels very quickly. If we stop using, even Bob Ward, who I had on last night, he admitted that if we stopped too quickly, we'd be back in the caves. But here's my point. How did the world warm previously before man was burning fossil fuels? Maybe it's all just natural.
Well, I wish. I mean, I tell you, I'd be much...
Well, it did for billions of years. It warmed and cooled and warmed and cooled.
You're exactly right. It did it for billions of years, and it did it over thousands of years. And all we've done is add a catalyst in the carbon in the atmosphere that speeded the whole thing up. So when people say this is a natural change, they're right. It's just not natural at the speed at which this change.
And where's the evidence? Where's the evidence, Tom, that if you stop using fossil fuels, if you get to net zero, where's the evidence that that's going to stop climate change that's gone on for billions of years?
Well, that's physics. It's really,
what do you mean physics?
Well, it's really simple. What is affecting us and why this matters is because the physics of carbon in the atmosphere determines what the temperature is, that addition to the temperature we've got, and what that does is drive the whole of the rest of the Earth system.
But there's natural CO2, there's natural carbon, which has driven climate change, possibly, potentially. So why is it that if we reduce and stop man-made CO2 emissions, why isn't the Earth going to keep warming in its natural cycle using natural emissions?
Well, let's get... that cycle goes on, and we've tracked that cycle, and you can...
So climate change won't stop?
Sorry, let me finish. Climate change that's being driven by burning fossil fuels, first of all, will stop if we stop burning fossil fuels. In other words, we won't stop making it worse. But you won't get better overnight if we stop doing that, because we've changed the climate. You're not going to change it back. You can't change it back. And as I just said, Richard, you know, doing things over hundreds of thousands of years is one thing. Doing them over a century is another. I wouldn't worry about it, except for the fact I like civilization. I like the fact that civilization keeps me in this studio, for instance.
Yeah, my issue is that, look, we all want cleaner air, we all care about the environment. My issue is that actually, as now the equivalent of the ONS in Norway has said, there's no evidence that actually reducing man-made CO2 emissions will lead to a stopping climate. Indeed, the IPCC itself says that even if you got to net zero tomorrow, it would take between 200 and 1,000 years to stop sea level rise.
Yeah, well, he's right about it. That's why it's such a problem. You can't, you know, we think of change, because most of us have changes in life, and we think things change, and then you try and change them back, or you just change and go forward. Right, you can't change this one back. This is irrevocable. You know, we're humans, we don't like irrevocable things.
We're going to keep talking about this, Tom. Time is against us, but we will have you back, because this is an ongoing debate. After all, they've had 28 of these in COP at various places around the world. They seem to get bigger. Now, big announcement in Wales is that Mark Drakeford, the First Minister for exactly 5 years, has announced his resignation. Interestingly, quite rare for a politician, he said when he was appointed exactly 5 years ago that he would stand for 5 years. And he's actually stuck to his word, and for that, all credit to him. I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Rowlands, who is a member of the Senate for the Conservative Party in North Wales. Sam, thanks for joining us. So did you expect this, first of all, for Mark Drakeford to keep to his word? And what's going to be his legacy, good or bad?
Well, it's good to join you this evening, Richard. As you say, Mark Drakeford laid out fairly early on that he was in this post for a fixed term in his mind. He didn't want to extend beyond that, and he's continued to give indications that within this existing parliamentary term, he would be looking to step down. I think it came a bit of a surprise that today was the day he chose, and as you said, it's an interesting date, considering it's bang on 5 years since he was elected as First Minister here in Wales, but a slight surprise there. And I have a huge amount of respect for anybody who stands for positions in politics, especially those positions of leadership, our policies and our ideas may be very different, but for somebody to put themselves out in front of public, I think takes a huge amount of courage sometimes, and I have a huge amount of respect for him. But in terms of his legacy, there's a number of question marks there, I suppose. We continue to see in Wales, sadly, a health service which is the worst performing across the UK. We have an economy which is the worst performing across the UK. And we have an education system which is the worst in the UK.
So that's a pretty bad legacy, it sounds like. Even the Prime Minister referred to that in Prime Minister's questions today.
Well, it's certainly not ideal, is it? And we'd want to see things much, much better here in Wales. And I guess it's also a legacy of 25 years of Labour here in Wales.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing. What socialism does to our services.
What about things slowing down with his 20-mile-an-hour limit that some 25% of Welsh adults are calling for a petition to lift it back to 30? I mean, that's a slowing legacy, isn't it?
Yeah, 20 miles per hour as a default speed limit in Wales is causing a huge amount of upsets here, and rightfully so. And as you say, huge numbers of people think it's completely bonkers. So that's not what we want to see here in Wales. As Conservatives, we've said we would remove that 20-mile default if we were elected here in 2026. Well, it does give an indication, doesn't it? It does give an indication as to what might happen across the UK if Labour came into power in Westminster.
Let's see, Sam
Keir
Rowlands.
Starmer said it's blueprint for the UK.
Let's see what happens with that. Sam Rowlands, thank you so much indeed for your thoughts on the announcement today that Mark Drakeford is going to stick to his word 5 years ago and resign as leader of the Welsh Labour Party in the Senate. Coming up, he's back, making a noise on social media. Yes, the one and only Gary Lineker. Is it a breach or is it not? Don't go anywhere. It's GB News.
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, Nigel Farage is back in Britain. The jungle hero returns and he means business. And his popularity is soaring above Rishi Sunak. Would you vote for Nigel to be Prime Minister? Plus, I'll be joined by influential Tory rebel Sir John Hayes. Did the five families bottle it last night in the Rwanda vote? Angela Levin has the latest Harry and Meghan drama. They've been named the biggest losers in Hollywood. And we'll bring you the most exciting pay-per-view anywhere on the telly. Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m. Be there.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to me, Richard Tice, here on Farage and GB News. Well, no surprise at all. One Gary Lineker. Yes, he of Match of the Day on BBC. He's been busy again, tweeting away on social media as he likes to do and has done for many, many years. Well, it seems as though, here we've got a picture of a recent tweet he's just done about Grant Shapps, obviously a Conservative MP and Cabinet Minister. So we've now got an incoming chairman, new chairman arriving shortly at the BBC, Dr. Samir Shah, and he was at a confirmation hearing today at the House of Commons, and he said actually that Mr. Lineker may be in breach of the guidelines. Absolutely fascinating. Joined now down the line by David Elstein, former chief executive of Channel 5 and producer at the BBC. David, were you surprised by this news today? Do you think this changes anything, or will the incoming chairman have his knuckles wrapped?
I actually think Samir said Gary was in breach. Not that he appeared to be, but that he was in breach, and he obviously is. Look, there's no question the guidelines apply to Gary. He's named in them. There are 8 do's and don'ts in the guidelines, and he's breached 6 of them. So that looks pretty comprehensive to me. He's just basically thumbing his nose at the BBC.
Do you think, therefore, that essentially Gary is almost deliberately trying to test it with a view to leaving fairly soon? Is this moving towards endgame?
I don't think he expects to leave. I think he expects to stay. He shouldn't stay. And obviously, if the BBC had more spine, it would fire him. Look, we all have to pay for the BBC if we want to watch television. We all chip in 5p towards Gary's large salary.
I regret that.
And frankly, if he takes the BBC shilling, which is actually our shilling, he has to comply with the guidelines. He can earn a living anywhere he likes. He doesn't have to work at the BBC.
Exactly.
But he's basically saying to the BBC, are you going to fire me or not?
Absolutely fascinating. He's laying down the gauntlet. Thank you very much indeed for that, David Elstein, for your clear view. Now, delighted, just before the end of the show, Scott Benton, independent MP for Blackpool South, has joined us in the studio to explain, Scott. So you voted in the Rwanda vote last night for the bill. Were you in any doubt, and why did you support the Prime Minister in this?
I was hugely conflicted, Richard, ahead of the vote, to tell you the truth. I was in a plethora of meetings with those so-called 5 Conservative families. We heard a range of different views from colleagues about why the bill is deficient, about how it doesn't get us to where we want to be. But to be fair to the Prime Minister, it takes us one step further to the goal both you and I want to see, which is stopping the boat. So the bill isn't perfect. In fact, it's far from that. But voting it down at the first hurdle when we weren't guaranteed that anything else...
And Scott, there's obviously there's lots more hurdles. So we've got a slide here which shows how much more it's got to go. Hopefully this will come up on screen in terms of the steps required in the House of Commons. There it's got committee stage, report stage, third reading. Then it's got to go to the House of Lords, where there's another 5 stages. It's quite a complex process, this. This is democracy. You've got the House of Lords, you've got another 5 stages, and then a final 2 stages including the royal assent. How long do you think this is going to take, Scott?
It's going to be very difficult, Richard, to get this on the statute book before the next election. The Lords could frustrate the process for months on end. It will then come back to the committee stage in the House of Commons.
And just before the next election, which many people say will be next autumn. Well, you're saying this could drag on for the whole through the next summer, whilst the votes keep coming?
The Prime Minister's aspiration is he wants this on the books before next summer, but you and I both know this problem has been around for 3 years. Conservative MPs like myself have been led up the hill twice. We voted for 2 bills, which, frankly, we were sold dummies. They were not fit for purpose.
But do you think, you've got confidence in the Prime Minister that this bill finally will achieve the objective of stopping the votes? Are you really that confident, or is this just sort of moving it along?
My view is firm. I don't think the bill is fit for purpose at this stage. My aspiration is it can be beefed up during committee stage and then come back to third reading.
And you trust him to do that, despite what he's hearing from the One Nation and Rwanda threatening to pull away from it?
I think the Prime Minister is going to have to do that.
But he said he couldn't go another inch, the Prime Minister.
Well, we will see, Richard. I don't think it's fit for purpose at this stage. The Conservative right, the so-called rebels, have been clear. Unless there are significant changes, many MPs in that group will vote against this at third reading.
Would you dare to vote against at third reading?
Absolutely. If this bill isn't fit for purpose and it doesn't stop the votes, then what is the point? It needs amending and it needs beefing up.
Absolutely fantastic. You've heard it here. He would vote against it if it's not beefed up. Coming up, it's Jacob Rees-Mogg, but first of all, it's the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News forecast. Turning chilly for a time this evening, but then mild air spreads back in overnight as cloud and rain moves in from the Atlantic. This weather front pushes southeastwards as we head through tonight and into Thursday, and then a north-south split into the weekend. High pressure keeping it dry in the south. This evening turning quite chilly, some frost out there, but overnight we see cloud and rain moving in from the Atlantic. This slowly pushing its way southeastward, so temperatures rising as the night goes on, taking us into Thursday morning. Most places frost-free, generally between 2 and 8 Celsius. But it does mean a cloudy, damp start for many, particularly across England and Wales, where we do have outbreaks of rain slowly pushing southeastwards. Brighter Northern Ireland and Scotland with blustery showers in the far north. And then through the day, the cloud and the rain slowly pushes southeastwards, becoming confined to the far southeast for the afternoon. Most places becoming dry and bright, plenty of sunny spells. Still some blustery showers across Scotland. Temperatures near average for the time of year, 7 to 11 Celsius, maybe just slightly above for some western parts. On Friday itself, some mist and fog and frost to start the morning, and then plenty of dry weather across England and Wales. Variable amounts of cloud. Cloudy skies, though, for Northern Ireland, Scotland. The risk of some rain as we move through the day here, and a mild day for everyone. Into the weekend, it generally stays quite cloudy, and temperatures remain above average for the time of year. See you soon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers.